What's your played around and found out story? Story 1. Walking down the sidewalk in NYC with my wife, I saw a banana peel on the ground and was like, why do they always show people slipping on these? How slippery can they be? I then proceeded to put all my weight on it and totally did the legs flying up in the air, landing on my butt thing like you see in cartoons. I look up and my wife was rolling her eyes to the point that I think she was seriously wondering how she married me. Story 2. I was a 7YO at a kid's party, and we all walked down to the bodega on the corner for slushies. I finished mine, and while we were all hanging at the pool, I noticed an unattended slushie another girl had. I was still thirsty, and being a greedy little, I put the straw to my lips for a sip. I just didn't realize a bee was stuck upside down in the straw, stinger first. Stinger meets lip, swollen for days. Greatest story of karma I've ever encountered. Story 3. A year or so ago, I decided it was a great idea to try and fix my car's brakes myself instead of paying a mechanic. Watched a couple of YouTube videos and thought, how hard can it be? Spoiler, very hard. I ended up with a car that wouldn't stop properly and nearly rolled into a mailbox during the test drive. Had to sheepishly call a tow truck and spend even more money getting a professional to fix both the brakes and the extra damage I caused. Definitely found out on that one. Story 4. My life is full of them, but most recently I decided to DIY a small bathroom makeover in my basement. Mostly retrofit, drywall, laminate flooring. 3 months and a couple of thousand later, it's still unfinished, and I need to hire someone to finish. How, you ask, is this FAFO? My brother is a gifted GC who does not live close said, man, it's tricky and can turn into a money pit quick. Just hire someone. Story 5. At work, I decided to step over a rolled-up carpet that was blocking the aisle. Instead of carefully navigating over or around it, I decided to jump over it. My toe caught on the stretch wrap, and I went knee first onto the concrete at high speed. Split my knee to the bone and was out of work for a month. Story 6. When I was little, maybe 4-ish years old, my grandma was supposed to be watching me but left me alone to go chat with her neighbor friend. I decided to climb on her dresser and jump across the maybe 2.5-foot gap to her bed, multiple times. I remember my tiny brain saying, okay, one more time before grandma comes home and gets mad at me. The last time I jumped, I missed. I cracked my forehead on her metal bed frame. 7 stitches later, I decided I'd probably not try that again. Story 7. Went on a hike with my family as a kid. I found an old metal bar and was hitting random things with it. When we got back to the car, lo and behold, I find an old WD-40 can. My old man was very specific about me not hitting it with the bar. Well, I did. The explosion was immediate and intense, and I was covered in old WD-40. I ended up riding home in the truck bed. Story 8. I was at an amusement park on the boardwalk, Ocean City, Maryland, with a friend, and I wanted to get up on the Zipper. The Zipper is a ride that has been around forever. The individual cabins seating 2 are like sacrificial cages with 2 bars to hang on to for dear life. You move in a circle while spinning in alternate directions is the best way I can describe it. My friend Yvonne said no way. She insisted she would throw up if she did that ride. I advised her that neither of us had eaten anything recently, so she has nothing to throw up. I kept twisting her arm. She finally gave in, all the time repeatedly saying she's going to vomit. So we're on the ride, full stop. I'm laughing and screaming, and Yvonne starts vomiting. Here's what happens if you puke while spinning around on the Zipper. The puke hits the mesh cage part and then flies back. Lands all over you. Hair, face, clothing, everything. I was hollering for the attendant to stop the ride. Of course, that makes him keep going and faster. Finally, when the ride stopped, Yvonne saying I told you so 100 times, I jumped off and ran into the ocean with my pocketbook on my shoulder. I had to get all of that vomit off of me. I walked back toward the Zipper. The attendant was hosing off our cage. Story 9. As kids, my brothers and I were playing with hairspray and lighters to do the whole flame torch thing. Well, my mom found the supplies behind the couch one morning. She was wearing a soft robe. She wanted to show us what happened when we played with fire. She took the lighter and lit her arm on fire. However, the flame spread a lot faster than she anticipated and her whole arm caught fire, and she was freaking out trying to get it out. She sure showed us what playing with fire will do. Story 10. I wanted to go out and play in the garden but wasn't allowed. I was being a brat and took my scooter and started driving around the house. Fast forward, I was driving on the carpet. Someone moved the table that was on top of it, and a small hill was created, which I stumbled over. The scooter crashed on my arm. I also fell with my entire weight on it, and some of the things on the table fell on me too. I broke my entire arm. Story 11. Challenged a friend to play gladiators on the monkey bars at school when I was 10. The one where you hang from the bars and wrap your legs around the other person to pull them off. Well, I took a foot to the crotch and needed inside stitches. I'm female. I still think I could have taken you, Ashley, you dirty fighter. Story 12. I was living in a rental house and was raking and cleaning up the backyard. There was a lot of pine straw. I raked it up into a decent-sized pile and decided to burn it. Being all about safety, I had a pail of water close by in case it got out of hand. I lit the pile and had no idea just how flammable pine straw and pine cones really are. A flame immediately shot really high. I freaked and threw the water from the bucket. It did very little. I panicked, ran to the house, fought with connecting and dragging a water hose, and made it back to the pile in probably a minute or two. Fortunately, I did not catch trees or neighbors' yards or houses on fire. Scared the hell out of me. Story 13, not me, but a few years back while driving to work and stuck in traffic, I saw a hideously ugly Honda Accord pulled over on the side of the road, surrounded by 10 cops' cars, 3 state troopers, and 5 unmarked SUVs. Absurdly and tackily tricked out. I'm talking gold spray-painted rims, every ugly decal from cash to dollar signs to crosses plastered all over the thing, like if Post Malone had transformed into a car like a transformer. The driver and I assume his girl were handcuffed and sitting on the curb, the man with his head down while the woman was practically screaming in his ear. I could see cops taking all kinds of guns and bricks from the trunk. When I got close enough, practically at a standstill in traffic 2 lanes over, I saw that on the back window of the car in that old English font was a bright white decal that said, "Around and find out." Story 14. When I was a kid, I was not allergic to poison oak. I felt like such a badass running through poison oak with my friends staring at me like I was crazy. I would always come out unscathed. The last time I did that hello poison oak allergy, I faffo big time. My eyes swelled shut and a rash all over. Story 15. I worked at a place where I bought all the office furniture, and I had a coworker who decided to publicly announce she would handle the owner's office because she didn't like the furniture I sourced. It wasn't great stuff, but my budget was limited. After selecting a lovely U-shaped desk with built-in cabinet from Staples, and it arrives in 6 different boxes. The boss is coming the next day, and she learned the hard way that Staples won't assemble things for you. Then she comes to me for help now that she's in a jam. But I'm busy because I thought you were handling this. The best part is she tried pushing her cleavage out at mid-20s. Me helped persuade me, and I still turned her down. The dick of consequences often arrives without lube. Story 16. I had a laptop and the keyboard was shorting out. It would randomly stop working and you had to push down on it, and it would start working again for a little while. One day I couldn't get more than a few keystrokes before needing to push on it again, so I started pushing harder and harder in my frustration. Eventually it culminated in me punching the keyboard, only to watch the laptop turn off and refuse to turn back on. When I took it apart to see what was wrong, I found I punched it hard enough to push through the keyboard, the plastic frame below, and cracked the motherboard, killing the laptop. Oops. Story 17. My cousin growing up had an Australian Shepherd that was not trained properly. She was chained up outside pretty much all day and didn't know how to interact with people, just barking and running as fast as it could before being yanked back by the chain. Well, one day the dog wasn't barking like crazy. It seemed rather calm and was wagging its tail. My brother and I approached the dog and it sat down and closed its eyes, awaiting pets. As soon as I reached my hand out toward the dog, it chomped my hand. My uncle wanted to shoot the thing, but I told him it's not the dog's fault. He did a terrible job training it. Story 18. Got a cut on my finger working in a warehouse about a decade ago. One particular coworker made fun of me for cleaning it and putting a Band-Aid on. Not 1 hour later, he got almost exactly the same cut. He just kept working to show me how a man does it. Next day, I come into work with a fully healed finger. He comes in with a sore red finger. After a couple days of it getting worse, he eventually goes to see a doctor. Turns out his finger got infected. He almost got part of his finger amputated, missed time from work, and had to mostly pay out of pocket for antibiotics. That is apparently the manly way to deal with a small cut. Story 19. I was 4 or 5, fresh off training wheels. I saw a plastic baby doll in the middle of the sidewalk and thought, I'm going to run that over. Nope, went face first into the concrete, completely scraped up the entire right side of my face. My dad said he let out a blood-curdling scream. The neighbors ran out to help because of his scream. I was fine, crying and scraped up, but fine. Until about 14 years old, my right cheek was always pink even after it healed. Story 20. So the story goes, when I was about 18 months to 2 years old, my parents had taken me and my older brother to a petting zoo farm type thing. I was chasing a chicken. Mom told me to stop, but I wouldn't. Well, now I have a scar above one of my eyes because the chicken pecked me out of revenge. Story 21. I was in elementary school. I was sitting at a table in class working on a project with another student. I kept tilting my chair forward so the back 2 legs were off the ground and balancing on the front 2. My teacher told me to stop, but as soon as she walked away, I went right back to it. The chair ended up sliding out from under me and my face slammed into the table. I bit right through my lower lip. It turns out the teacher wasn't trying to ruin my fun. Story 22. I was foraging in the forest, and I had a stick and was poking at things and moving leaves and branches with it. I saw a weird hole in the ground and poked it, and a ton of angry hornets chased me for half a mile, and I had to jump in a river to get away from them, and the still were stinging me. Story 23. I used to love stickers as a kid, and I had the brilliant idea of putting a fresh Dorito-sized sticker on my testicles before taking a bath. Instant regret, screaming and crying. My parents had to pull it off slowly, and I can recall it being as horrible as it sounds. As an adult, I feel for my parents having to deal with my stupidity at that age. Story 24. Stuck in traffic driving out of Vegas on New Year's Day, and decided to bypass traffic by driving on the shoulder. About 10 minutes later, we slowly caught up to them, pulled over by a cop. We rolled down our windows and gave them the Nelson ha-ha. Story 25. I love jellyfish as food. I order it every time I'm at a restaurant. I was snorkeling and swam into a school of what I thought were moon jellies. I had heard they don't sting, so I picked one up and tried to eat it. It didn't sting my hands, but it stung the out of my face and mouth. Took a day to regain my sense of taste and for the swelling to go down. A story 26. I was 15 when my buddy decided I needed to learn how to drive a manual. He picked me up in his dad's old truck. He drove the truck all the time, with permission, of course. We had an unusual snowfall that week, and most of the roads were still at least partly frozen. We head out, and I'm doing okay at first. We stop at a red light. The road had a steep incline where the light was. I got the truck up the hill, but I couldn't keep it there. We started to roll backward. Neither of us could gain enough control over it to correct in time. We rolled into the front of the car behind us, a luxury car that was driven by an off-duty detective in our city. I didn't have a permit or ID of any kind at the time. My friend was only 16, so not old enough to let me drive with him as a passenger. Special note, this went down while my friend's dad was supposed to be out of town for work. This was before everybody had cell phones, so my friend just took the truck without asking his dad because it was never a problem before. So he didn't bother tracking his dad down to ask permission. However, we didn't know that his dad cut his trip early and was on his way home before my friend got to my house. He saw the truck was gone and called the police. Here we were, 0.15 and 16. Driving a truck that was reported stolen with no licenses, and we just backed into an off-duty detective. We got arrested, clearly. It got worked out afterwards once his dad realized we had the truck. The auto theft charges got dropped, but we got in trouble for the other stuff. We had a year of probation, and I wasn't allowed to get my driver's license until I turned 18. Story 27. Decided not to use a condom because we were in the shower, and it'd be easier to pull out with cleanup. Pregnant with twins. We were in a if it happens, it happens stage of life, so it's been a beautiful and wonderful time, but yeah, the pull-out method does not work. I was also at the least fertile time of the month, so the rhythm method also does not work. Story 28. When I was in the Peace Corps, I was stationed in a country where we had to take anti-malaria medication every morning. I tried taking it, but I hated how the pills were making me nauseous, so I stopped taking them for a week. Long story short, having malaria really sucks, and I wouldn't wish it on my second worst enemy. Story 29. Ooh, my son, 7, got to experience FAFO just yesterday. He pinned his sister, 3, down to blow raspberries on her despite her protests, so she bit him hard. He came to me to tattle, and all he got was a chat about consent. And before you call me an a-hole for not stopping it beforehand, I was in the bathroom for like 2 minutes, which is apparently just long enough for my son to learn a valuable life lesson. Story 30. When my kids were little, I would make a bottle of SodaStream Coke for them, but it would go flat before we could finish it. You're not supposed to refizz anything that isn't just plain water. Tired mom brain me thought, I wonder why they say I can't refizz this. Is it a money grab to sell more syrup? I then decided to try refizzing the soda pop. My friends, it was a total FAFO scenario. Sticky cola exploded all over the kitchen, the floors, the walls, the cabinets, the ceiling, the next room. We don't live in that house anymore, but I guarantee there's still soda stuck somewhere. Don't try to refizz your SodaStream drinks. Story 31. Wanted to help my mom scrape wallpaper off when we were decorating. I was 6 and she knew I'd hurt myself with the paper scraper, so she gave me a butter knife, no sharp edges. Still managed to stab myself in the eye. Have a lovely little scar on my eyelid to show for it now. Friend of mine was waiting for me to get ready on a night out. Ran out of the toilet at my work to find him crying on the floor in pain. He tried to do a Goku stretch and dislocated his knee. Story 32. Some 10 plus years ago, before I logged into work, I got a discount at Starbucks to have them fill up my 32 ounces water bottle with iced mocha. Before I did that, I bought 2 bags of sour dried fruits, one for me and one for my mom who loves them. You'd think the iced mocha would have woken me up, but after drinking a quarter of it, I wasn't awake enough. So I figured a few mouthfuls of sour dried fruit might do the trick. In a matter of speaking, it did work. I spent at least 15 minutes of work on the toilet, evacuating my bowels. I returned to my desk feeling incredibly light, I tell you. Story 33. Having not one but two FWB. They were friends and in the same band together. A knew about B, B didn't know about A. A is with B and asks if I want to come have a devil's three-way. I show up, and B was not expecting me. Neither of them talked to me for a hot minute. It's all blown over 10 plus years later. Occasional Yoko jokes. Now questioning it, setting my husband up on guitar dates for them to all hang out was the smartest thing. Possible V2. Story 34. Sorry, it's only a G-rated story. Opened a file that said Xmas on my parents' computer because I was curious what it was. Found out it was the labels my parents put on Santa presents. That combined with seeing one of my Santa presents in a shopping bag that my mom gave proof to me, Santa isn't real. Yeah, sure, not a big deal. But when you have to do a charade that Santa is still real among your little cousin, also knowing that you have two more cousins on the way the following year and sister, and are not really good at lying and dishonesty as a kid. Next theme. What's the most absurd fact that sounds fake but is actually true? Story 1. About 2/3 of your human ancestors are female. It's because of pedigree collapse, where you should have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 GT grandparents, etc. So, going back about 30 generations, that is the Middle Ages, you should have 1 billion ancestors, which is more people than even existed. In reality, as you go back in your family tree, the same people start to appear multiple times. For example, anyone with any English blood will have King Edward thus as an ancestor on dozens of separate lines because of his many children, including bastards. The flip side of this is that many more males than females leave no descendants at all. Story 2. There's a species of jellyfish called Turritopsis dohrnii, also known as the immortal jellyfish. I had to Google the name LOL, that can literally reverse its aging process. When it's injured, sick, or even just stressed, it reverts its cells back to their earliest form, essentially starting its life over again. It's like the creature figured out how to cheat death, hitting the reset button on its existence. Crazy MO. Story 3. Octopuses have 3 hearts, and 2 of them stop beating when they swim. It sounds like something made up for a sci-fi movie, but it's totally true. What's even crazier is that they're incredibly intelligent, like escape artists level smart, and can even use tools. Sometimes it feels like they're little aliens living in our oceans. Honestly, the ocean is so wild, it's like the Earth's version of outer space. Story 4. Honey never spoils. Archaeologists have actually found pots of honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that are over 3,000 years old and still perfectly edible. Its low moisture content and acidity act as natural preservatives, preventing bacteria and mold from growing. Pretty wild, right? Story 5. Hummingbirds' feet are so small that they only use them for perching, scratching, and nest building. Instead of using their feet to launch into flight, the wings do all the work. Their order name, apodiform, meaning footless, makes sense when seeing a hummingbird in flight. Their feet are nearly invisible. While they do have feet, they do not have knees. Story 6. Janet Jackson's 1989 song, Rhythm Nation, can crash some laptops with specific hard drives. The song's resonant frequency matches the natural resonant frequency of certain hard drives, causing them to shut down. Story 7. Tasmanian devil populations are heavily impacted by a contagious cancer that causes facial tumors. When devils bite each other on the face, the cancer cells spread from one individual to the next, and due to low genetic variation, it is able to evade the new host's immune system and multiply. These cancer cells originally started out as normal Tasmanian devil cells but are now a separate parasitic organism. But by phylogenetic classification, they are considered a descendant of Tasmanian devils, and so would also be considered a marsupial. Similar contagious cancers have been found in dogs, Syrian hamsters, and clams. Story 8. Birds cannot taste spice. This is actually why peppers evolved. The spice would keep other animals away, so only birds would eat them and spread their seeds. Then humans came along and decided this hurts good, and made them much more powerful than they would be in nature. Story 9. For a long time, trees and woody plants were non-biodegradable. This was because there were no organisms that could break down the lignin or the cellulose. It took 40 million years of evolution before a species of fungus emerged that was able to convert these components. By then, a thick layer of dead and fallen trees covered the earth. Wildfires were on a different scale back then. Plenty of log to put on the fire, so to say. It's also the reason we have natural deposits of coal. This is known as the Carboniferous period. Story 10. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the building of the first Pizza Hut than to the building of the pyramids. The first Pizza Hut opened in Wichita, Kansas on June 15, 1958. That means that the chain's opening is about 500 years closer to Cleopatra's lifetime than the construction of the Giza pyramids. Story 11. New Mexico is older than Mexico. The territory of New Mexico was established by Spain in 1592, while the country of Mexico won independence from Spain and adopted that name in 1821. Both are named after a valley in present-day Mexico. Story 12. Found this out yesterday, but in 2011, a guy in Australia found what was essentially an infinite money hack on the ATMs where he could press transfer and transfer as much money as he wanted between his accounts. It would say the transaction was canceled, but it wasn't canceled. And he got to spend millions of dollars for 4.5 months until his conscience got the best of him. He tried to turn himself in multiple times and even went on TV to tell people about what he was doing, stealing millions from the banks. Despite trying to turn himself in, it took quite a while for anyone to investigate him, and when they finally did, he only got 1 year in jail and only forced to pay back a fraction of the money he stole. Pretty cool story. Story 13. With our current understanding of astrophysics, we will never travel the stars. They are too far, and there is no technology to even come close to the light barrier. There's also the fact that the universe is forever expanding exponentially. You can't factor for infinity. There's 0 point in Musk's attempts to colonize Mars. If we can't control this planet, we're going to fail miserably with even more extreme ones. He's wasting money by tricking stupid people into giving him what he wants with scary words. People point to the warp drive theory, but you would need a ship with an engine the size of the Sun or Jupiter. Both are insanely large tasks that we have no clue how to even start. Further, you are just creating a star inside the engine. Isn't going to move? The human body evolved to live on Earth. Once taken off of our planet, our bodies begin falling apart in multiple ways. Hearing loss, bone loss, muscle loss, madness, radiation sickness, the lack of Earth frequencies, it's all bad. If humans want to travel the stars, we better learn how to use magic because the universe is a cold, uncaring place and we weren't meant for it. Edit. As you can see, wishing and hoping takes precedence over the cold, hard science of it. Almost everyone who replied is obviously upset at this outcome and wants something different. That's not how science works. Story 14. Asparagus just grows like that out of the dirt. No plant body to pull it from or anything. Just looks like someone went around sticking spears in the ground to try to trick you into thinking they grow that way. Story 15. Probably won't get seen, but chipmunks eat rattlesnakes. Edit. Chipmunks defend themselves from Massasauga rattlesnake by hunting and killing them. Being omnivores, they will eat the dead snakes. I discovered this fact by happening upon a chipmunk eating the rattle off a rattlesnake, videoed it, and then asked my friend, who is an MNR officer, about it, and he was the one to explain to me. This is what they do. Story 16. How long it take to count to 1 billion? Counting to 1 billion manually can take over 100 years. If you count each number in a second, it would take 31.7 years to reach 1 billion. However, it may take longer than 60 years because it takes more than a second to say many of the numbers. Also, if you were to receive 10K every day, it would take 274 years to make $1 billion. Story 17. Disclaimer, I have this from another one of these threads. Apparently, we know next to nothing of how a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. We know that it makes a cocoon, dissolves into goo, then the goo comes together as a butterfly. But how does it achieve that, and how is it that the goo retains memory of the caterpillar? We don't know. Story 18. I've always liked the one about the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. Imagine someone gave you $1 million and told you to spend $1,000 every day and come back when you ran out of money. You would return with no money left in 3 years. If someone then gave you $1 billion and you spent $1,000 each day, you would be spending for about 2,740 years before you went broke. Story 19. The first refrigerators were invented before electricity. They were hand-pumped by servants and thus were mostly used to chill food before eating it rather than for storage. It was a really awful job too. In addition to the strain of hand-pumping, ammonia was used as a refrigerant, and the seals for the tubing weren't great, so the poor operators would end up breathing in ammonia the whole time. Story 20. The British fought and paid off the rest of the world for over 60-plus years in order to end slavery. Even after paying, other nations and companies went back on the deals and continued to try and deal in slaves. This prompted the Brits to send the Royal Navy to Africa and began raids on slave ships to rescue and free hundreds of thousands of slaves. Considering the push back towards the British for this stance, had they not done so, it is very conceivable that the Atlantic slave trade would be alive and well today. Story 21. This sounds like complete bull, but besides being incredibly smart, crows have a collective memory and way of sharing visual knowledge intergenerationally. If you are mean to them, somehow their offspring will know to look out for you no matter where they are. This is the ultimate grudge. Story 22. Despite knowing the exact speed of light, we have never, and likely never will, be able to measure the speed of light in one direction. All measurements are of light going to a point and coming back to the source. It is possible that the speed of light is c2 in one direction and instantaneous in the other. Story 23. The one that bothers me most is that the word barbarian came from the Romans mocking those who didn't speak Latin as sounding like they were saying bar, bar, bar when they spoke their native languages. This sounds so stupid to me. I've looked it up every time I told someone just to verify I didn't get bad information the previous time I read it. Story 24. 90% of people in Northern Europe who have blue eyes are distantly related by their 500X great-grandma or great-grandpa, who had one of 3 specific mutations that result in blue eyes. They are also related to a 7,000-year-old dead guy they found in a cave in Spain, the oldest definitively known human to have had blue eyes. Story 25. The London Bridge, the one that was built in the 1830s, was actually moved all the way to Arizona in 1971. The city of London sold it, and it was moved brick by brick all the way to Lake Havasu City, Arizona, where it was reassembled. The guy who bought it wanted to turn Lake Havasu into a tourist destination, and he came up with the surprisingly brilliant idea to move the London Bridge into his city. Somehow it worked, and Lake Havasu City is a very big tourist spot in Arizona. You can drive on the original 1830s London Bridge today, all the way on the other side of the planet. Story 26. That what we know as penguins are just funky little identity thieves and all the real penguins are dead. Modern penguins are named after the great auk, also known as a penguin, and the only species in the genus Penguinus. When what we now call penguins were discovered, we decided they looked like the great auk, so we just called them penguins too. They're actually not even genetically related. Great auks are now very much extinct, so there's no actual penguins anymore. Story 27. A single cloud can weigh more than 1 million pounds. Clouds may look light and fluffy, but they are actually made up of tons of water droplets or ice crystals. A typical cumulus cloud can weigh over 1 million pounds, about 500,000 kilograms. Despite this immense weight, the cloud floats in the air due to the updrafts and air currents that support it. Story 28. The Pledge. If you set up an experiment where a coherent beam of light is blocked except for 2 slits, and the light is displayed on a sheet on the far side of the 2 slits, you will see a line of alternating light and dark bands. This is caused by the wave nature of light, which interferes with itself as it emerges from the 2 slits, causing some parts of the beam to be reinforced and some to be suppressed. The turn. If you arrange to fire 1 photon at a time from your projector, you will see exactly the same pattern if your projection screen records where the photons impact. This is because the single photon interacts with itself as it goes through both slits at the same time. The photon behaves like a wave, passing through both slits simultaneously and then interfering with itself on the other side. This simple experiment shows the utterly unintuitive and strange nature of the quantum nature of reality. The prestige? If you set up a detector on each slit, such that the passage of a photon could be detected, the interference pattern goes away. The act of detecting that the photon has gone through one but not the other of the slits makes that actually true, and the quantum nature of reality is hidden again. The photon behaves like a particle and not a wave. The universe somehow knows you're inspecting it, and once it has determined it is being observed, it hides its true nature from the observer. Story 29. An owl has a lower chance of breaking up with their partner than you do. Only 23% of owls get divorced, meaning one leaves the nest area and the other keeps the house, and the rest stay mates for life. Owls do usually find new mates if theirs happens to die, though. Story 30. School principals and district administrators don't really make significantly more money than teachers per hour. It's counterintuitive because admin do have higher annual salaries, but most of that difference comes from working summers. In contrast, take most any other industry, and it's fair to expect leadership to make something in the range of 2x, 1,000x the hourly salary of an average employee. Story 31. The Spartans hated freedom, even by the abysmal standards of ancient Greece. No society in history had a greater percentage of slaves. They were also not superior individual fighters. Life under Sparta was so intolerable that they actually managed to produce a slave revolt with their trashy ideology in an economic environment where such things were unheard of, and abolitionism was effectively not even invented yet. Despite winning the Peloponnesian War, they lost it all to revolution because they were useless, obsolete conservatives who are incapable of adaptation. Zack Snyder, and every right-winger, is an illiterate who doesn't do research. When Sparta fell, the world gained. The myth of Sparta has been upheld throughout history by out-of-touch aristocrats who love subjugation. After learning about Greek history, in my opinion, every football team who calls themselves the Spartans is just slapping a trashy little rich boy label on themselves. Not the image I think they would like to evoke. That goes for military units as well. Story 32. Don't know if this is absurd, but I do know many people find it difficult to believe when they find out about it. If we placed all the other planets in our solar system next to each other in a line, including Jupiter, they'd fit in the space between Earth and the Moon. Story 33. No fancy terms, just layman's here. Among many other interesting facts about the range, the Appalachian Mountains are older than bones. The mountains formed before land animals even existed. It is also separated over several continents, breaking apart when the continents split. Story 34. Corn is a fruit. Technically, when eaten soft, it is the fruit formed from the ripened ovary of the plant. However, it is commonly placed as a vegetable on food pyramids. Yet if dried and ground, it becomes more akin to a grain. Story 35. American football player Larry Fitzgerald was a starter for 17 years, holds many receiving records for the Arizona Cardinals, including having 1,432 receptions, second most in NFL history behind Jerry Rice, and over 17,000 total receiving yards. He dropped a total of 29 passes in his entire 17 years in the NFL, almost 1,500 catches and only 29 drops. Story 36. Cameras are not at all necessary in one's pursuit to watch somebody in the privacy of their own home or otherwise, and is completely possible to have their face, bust, gyroscopically stabilized for viewing on a specific frequency range telewave channel. Story 37. The phrase babbling brook comes from the brain's psychological neurological need to make sense of ambiguous sounds. It's called auditory pareidolia. It's when static, wind, or flowing water is interpreted as meaningful, perceiving speech or melodies where none exist. I learned when I tried to figure out why I sometimes hear random in my brown noise machine when falling asleep. Story 38. The thing that girls make nose correction to be more beautiful, but exactly the beautiful now, is just the way they all look the same and can't frown due to rhinoplasty. It is really funny when told them why you're looking sad, and they just look at you like a dog which want a hot dog. Story 39. The bumblebee mistakenly thinks it is flying when it couldn't be. Engineers will testify the way they're constructed they could never fly. They say they shouldn't try to ever reach the sky. For experts have found that aerodynamics show it couldn't leave the ground. Happily, the bumblebee isn't well acquainted with this theory, for he still flies from plant to plant without ever realizing that he can't. Story 40. According to scientists, there are more stars than grains of sand on Earth. That's always blown my mind how much is out there. Google gives better details. Our planet has 7.5 sextillion, 75 plus 17 zeros, of grains of sand. This estimate is based on how big the average sand grain is and how much sand there is on Earth, including in beaches, deserts, and sandboxes. The fact there are more stars? How big is that big black thing above us? Story 41. Found this out this morning at the vet. Domestic rabbits can get a sinuous infection and simply refuse to eat. Because they stop eating, their entire digestive system goes into stasis. Even if the infection clears, they'll refuse to eat because they don't have an appetite. So basically, they'll starve themselves if they have a decent cold. Little homie is good now. Vet flushed his sinuses, gave him antibiotics, and basically force-fed him. Story 42. The kiwi, bird, not the fruit, nor a New Zealander, despite having a beak that appears longer than most birds, actually has the shortest bird beak in the world. This is because scientifically, beaks are measured from the tip of the beak to the nostrils. And the kiwi is the only bird in the world to have its nostrils at the end of its beak. Story 43. Titanic is only famous because she sank. They didn't even have many pictures of her. So in the aftermath, newspapers and newsreels touched up existing images of Olympic to look like train. If you ever see pictures in a book labeled as Titanic's interiors, 9 times out of 10 it's actually Olympic. Story 44. Stegosaurus and Tyrannosaurus never met because there is a time gap of roughly 80 million years between the existence of these species. Tyrannosaurus went extinct around 66 million years ago, which means Tyrannosaurus is closer in history to a Hannah Montana concert than it is to Stegosaurus. Story 45. Haven't seen it yet, so apologies if this is complicated. Janet Jackson's song Rhythm Nation has a frequency in one section that would cause some laptop hard drives to crash. It plays at one section, and sold because the crash, even if it was just being played on a nearby system. Not the system that crashed. There's a filter in Microsoft code to stop this frequency from causing the crash. Story 46. Whales used to live on land. They have evolved legs into flippers and have essentially floating pelvises in their bodies that serve no purpose. Whales still need to come to the surface for air, so their evolution is not done yet. I know some of us already know this, but a surprisingly large number of people don't. And if you're seeing this for the first time, Welcome to the community of those of us who also found out much later in life. Side note, you can't convince me that whales weren't dinosaurs that escaped to the sea after the meteor hit. It makes logical sense to me, and no, I can't prove it. It's my theory. Story 47, bananas are berries, but strawberries are not. Botanically speaking, a berry is a fruit produced from a single flower with one ovary and typically contains multiple seeds. Bananas fit this definition. But strawberries develop from a flower with multiple ovaries and are classified as aggregate fruits. Story 48. Well, I have two first. Whales don't actually die. They just get so old that they don't have the power to get up to the surface to breathe. Don't know if someone else said this. Second, cats don't purr just only because they're happy or relaxed. They also purr when they are anxious or nervous. If I had to take a guess on why, I would probably say because it's like some kind of relaxation technique of them. Story 49. I don't know if this fact is as crazy as some others, but when I first heard it years ago, it blew my little mind. You don't see in real time because light has to travel from whatever you are looking at to your eyes. Yes, light travels really fast, but you are not looking at something as how it actually is. You are seeing it as how it was a few nanoseconds or whatever long it takes the light to reach your eyes. Story 40. Henry Avery the Pirate was the first officially declared global manhunt in human history because he captured the pilgrimage fleet of the Muggles on their way to Mecca, including the Gunsway, and stole roughly $115 million worth of loot in 2024 dollars. Henry Avery somehow managed to elude capture and disappeared without a trace. The treasure was never recovered. Unless you believe he and Thomas too and all the gold are currently at the bottom of a hidden bay of Libertalia off the coast of Madagascar because of Nathan Drake. Story 41. Perry, from Phineas and Ferb, is venomous. Not in the cartoon, but in reality. Perry is a platypus, and being that he's a male puss, he doesn't lay eggs, but the backs of his legs have spurs. Perry cannot kill you, but for a day or so he can make you wish he had. Story 42. Scientific testing has found that most, perhaps all human beings have psychokinetic power. When volunteers for a study were randomly assigned into two groups, with half asked to merely watch a steel ball trickle down wooden pegs with the final slot resting places tallied by computer, and the other half asked to mentally push the ball to one side, either left or right. The final resting place was different for the two groups. The difference was tiny, 1/5 of 1%. But the huge number of samplings done allowed scientists to say with extreme confidence that the difference was due to something other than random chance. IRC, it was one chance out or 200 billion that the difference was due to random chance. Story 43. The human body has a nasal cycle that congests and then decongests one nostril at a time throughout the day, about once every 2.5 hours. So you always breathe better through one nostril than the other. It's not your imagination. Story 44. The Federal Reserve is neither federal nor has any reserves. The Federal Reserve is a banking cartel of unelected bankers who control the USA's money. The dollar has depreciated by 96% since the Federal Reserve's formation. The Federal Reserve is why you feel poorer every year they cause inflation and blame it on everything but their money printing. Bitcoin is your only hope to retire. If you save in US dollars, you are getting poorer. Story 45. DARPA created a non-invasive neural manipulation weapon, the Brain Initiative, recently relocated to NIH, that can both read and write to the brain. It can also interface with electronics ranging from cell phone tech to input and analysis by artificial intelligence. They're using that on civilians, and it's the true cause behind Havana syndrome.